Good morning. Good, you talk. That's going to help so much during the day. So, my name is Dr Bev. I'm looking after the first group of boys and girls who are going to join me on stage, where we are going to be discussing Boomtown. What the Whoniverse has meant for LGBT people here in Cardiff and in Wales. So, without any further ado, would you please welcome on stage David Llewellyn, Llyr Morus, my colleague Lisa Power, and Mr. Edward Russell. Before we start the discussion, I'm going to ask each of our beautiful, beautiful guests just to give us a couple of minutes and tell us a little bit about themselves and how they're involved with the Whoniverse. Ms. Power?
Well, I'm basically someone who is a lesbian and moved to Cardiff. I know, you've never noticed.
I know.
Moved to Cardiff a decade ago, and I have to say, part of what attracted me to Cardiff, I was down here on business, was having watched all of the Doctor Who episodes like Boomtown, and I fell in love with Cardiff Bay because it's like Disneyland for grown-ups. And when I was trying to explain why I was coming down to Cardiff and how it had changed and the image of Cardiff changing, I was showing them things like Boomtown to show them how much Cardiff had changed. And I think it did that for a lot of people across the country. It showed how cool Cardiff was.
Brilliant. David?
My name is David Llewellyn. I'm a writer based here in Cardiff, and I've written a series of books for BBC Books featuring the 10th and 11th Doctor, and audio plays for Big Finish for their Torchwood and Doctor Who ranges.
Mr. Russell?
My name's Edward Russell. I work on Doctor Who. I've been there for 12 years, I think, and I work as the brand manager, which basically means I look after all the activity around it. So there's the show that's made, but everything else that happens, whether it's merchandise or public events like this, comes under my watchful gaze, no pun intended. And I moved to Cardiff for the job 12 years ago, initially just for a year for an attachment, and fell in love with the job and with Cardiff. I'm from Wales originally, but was brought up in England, which is why I speak like this. But I've become a repatriated Welshman. Very proud to be here, and absolutely love the show, love everything to do with it, and yes, that's me.
And Llyr?
Yes, I'm Llyr Morus. I'm currently the series producer on Pobl y Cwm, the Welsh language soap opera. But I started, so is it 12 years ago now?
No, it's more than that. It was 13 years ago.
13 years ago, I was the location manager on the first series that came back. And then went on and stayed within the drama department in BBC Wales. That's where I still am.
Lovely. My name's Dr Bev. I'm part of the management team for Pride Cymru, or Cardiff Pride as it was. And my greatest claim to fame was 13 years ago. I turned up to do a show at Minsky's. And as I arrived, we couldn't park the car because somebody had parked this massive blue box. And we're filming an episode called Rose in what was the outside market in Cardiff. And I just sat there with my partner, who has since been dumped. Because I sat there and went, it's the TARDIS. Fucking TARDIS. And then Christopher Eccleston walked past me and I was like, huh? Then I got very excited because I realised that somebody called Russell T Davies was there. And we might touch on this a little later. It's 18 years since a particular TV show graced our screens. And next week I'm going to be walking down Canal Street going, I'm doing it all over again. And I sat there and I was fortunate enough to meet Russell that night, and I have been in awe of him ever since. Sorry, dear. And my claim to fame is that Russell was kind enough to mention the fact that he'd met a particular drag queen in Cardiff in one of his first columns for Doctor Who magazine about a month later. So that's my claim to fame and my entrance into the Whoniverse. So with all that in mind, we all have our reasons for being involved with Doctor Who. Mine is quite and understated. So Lisa, can we start with you then, as you moved here Part of the reason you moved to Cardiff and the Bay and your beautiful flat, because I've been in it, which purely by chance overlooks the Doctor Who exhibition.
I was there first.
Can you tell me what in your opinion, Doctor Who, Torchwood, Class, Sarah Jane's Adventures, all the spin-offs have done for Cardiff and Wales?
Well, for me, one of the interesting things is how tolerant Cardiff and Wales is compared to many other parts of the UK that I've lived in around LGBT matters. But when I came here, it didn't feel like we were that visible initially. And I really feel like Doctor Who and Torchwood and now Class have given people the confidence, and it's kind of permeated a lot of things. It feels like Cardiff is a really important, fun city now. And when I first moved here, a decade ago, my friends in London, who were snobby bastards, were like, why are you trying to leave London, the centre of the known gay world, to go to Cardiff? And now they're all like, oh, you live in Cardiff, you lucky cow. And I think that the Doctor Who universes have been a huge part of that. Plus, I got to know a guy who's also sitting there called Gareth David Lloyd, and helped him out with conventions for a while, and we had some seriously good laughs, and we nearly got thrown out of Comic-Con once. That was fun. You turned me into a hooligan again. You brought me back to my hooligan youth. So
A hooligan.
Nice. I like
a hooligan. We should use that.
Edward, can I come over to you? You moved back to Cardiff as well, so...
Yeah, I did. So when I grew up, Cardiff wasn't very nice. So I would come back to Wales. I would come back to Wales in the 70s and 80s, and my parents would never want to come here because it just wasn't a very nice place at the time. So I presume Cardiff was still the same, and already by the time I was here in 2006, it had been quite developed, and that's grown and grown and grown. And partly because the job was here, I stayed, but also I fell in love with the city and eventually with a man, so that's a reason enough to stay. I've got such brilliant memories of Cardiff, and they're largely to do with turning Cardiff into alien worlds or planets or other places. One of my favourite memories of my time here is the month of July 2007, when all it did was rain. It rained non-stop. But do you remember we were, on every rainy day, Russell and Phil was with Kylie Minogue? You don't get gayer than that, do you, really? And I think people make a joke because I always bring up the Kylie thing because it was the most exciting thing that ever happened to me in my life. And you think to yourself, wow, I'm going to spend a month filming with Kylie on Doctor Who. It doesn't get better than that. But I got some sort of weird thing that I couldn't really speak around her. And because I didn't want her to think I was a massive fan, because I am. But I didn't want to be a bit over the top and bore her. And there was one moment where we spent the whole night in the Owain Glyndŵr pub in the centre of Cardiff, which is when we were filming the exterior scenes, where we cut off the whole of Cardiff city centre for that, didn't we? And I'm just sat there with Kylie in this Welsh pub, in this Cardiff pub. And it's near the end of the shoot, and she's like, oh, yeah. She started talking about when she had breast cancer, which she'd not long recovered from, and what it was like to perform on stage and so on and so forth, which is very many gay men's fantasies to be there with her from a Doctor Who talking about this. And I was sort of like, huh. Because I didn't want her to think I was a mega, mega fan. And now I look back and think, well, that's probably not the best way to handle it. But whenever I eventually move on and leave Cardiff, if ever I do, that will be the one thing that I take with me.
Wow.
I didn't expect that.
Oh, you said Kylie.
Jelly baby.
Everyone's attention, Kylie. Cleo, obviously as a location manager, you get to see a lot of the city. Quite a lot, I would imagine, that those of us who live in the city don't get to see. So how do you think the Whoniverse has impacted on the city?
Well, Edward says, fond memories of turning Cardiff into alien planet stuff. When Russell and Phil give you a script to go and find some location that doesn't exist, it's your worst nightmare rather than actually being the fun bits about it. It's great. I mean, being a location manager has its good things and bad things about it. It's the best job when you can go around and go into places, go behind the scene of places that you wouldn't normally get to see. But then you have to turn up at 5 in the morning and pack people up, and that's not the nice bit of it, because everybody wants their van to be closest to the door. But, you know, we've been able to use places, change, and some places have been used more than once, but you'd never guess, and that's sort of credit to the amazing design teams and stuff that you work with. You can find the initial location for them, but then they come in and create the pure magic and take you to that other planet that it was meant to be. So, but Cardiff has got so much to offer that, you know, it is quite fantastic.
That's brilliant. Actually, you just remind me, I think it was actually this very building that we're in. I remember there was one particular Saturday night where the National Museum featured on Casualty, Doctor Who, and on Upstairs, Downstairs, all in the same night, which is quite I think in Casualty it was the local courts, in Doctor Who it was a museum, and in Upstairs, Downstairs I think it was Hitler's headquarters. And it was, I mean, that's part of the magic of living in Cardiff. I'll come to you in a second if that's all right. I work in the Bay during the day. I'm not like this. I'm quite a responsible job with children. But I work at a place called Techniquest, and I don't know if you know Techniquest. It's the, well, thank you, the big word shout out there. They don't work with me. And we get a lot of tourists into where I work, and I quite often sit there and say, oh, and if you look over there, there's the dock. Yes, we know where that is. I said, around the corner there's Torchwood Tower. Yes, we know where that is. And have you been to Yanto Shrine? Yes, we know where that is. And then we get to talk about places like Castle Coch and this place, and you know, I get to tell people how it's really, really passionate for me as somebody who moved to Cardiff 25 years ago when I was 3. Like Edward, I'm Welsh by birth. I was brought up in Yorkshire, and I moved back here when I was 18. So do your math. And I am so proud of this city. And for me, the biggest two influences that changed Cardiff and made it into the town that it is was Wembley Stadium being rebuilt, so the Millennium Stadium had everything, and the arrival of Doctor Who. Quite simply, that's why Cardiff is as brilliant as it is, because Doctor Who has brought so much in the terms of work and the BBC studios and the upcoming Bad Wolf studios, and then the knock-on effect with tourists. Let's be honest, Doctor Who is massive, and justifiably so. And that's where I'm passionate about Cardiff, and I get to see tourists and I get to see little kids, and they walk into where I work, wearing long scarves, eating jelly babies, a remote control canine coming behind them. And I love it, I absolutely love it. And I get to sit there and go, no, I know some of these people. And it's thrilling, absolutely thrilling for me. So that's my little intake on Boomtown. David?
I think for me, actually, because we'll probably talk later on, that people will talk about representation and seeing gay, lesbian and transgender characters on screen. For me, actually, it was also a case of Welsh representation, because I'd grown up at a time when there was some film and TV production here. You had things like, I think Terry Gilliam always loved bringing film productions here because we had lots of castles, so Time Bandits was filmed in Raglan and stuff. But you didn't often see Wales on screen, and you certainly didn't see Wales on screen as Wales. So for me, that was a big deal. And actually, the biggest sense of that I got, obviously I watched Doctor Who when that started, but the biggest sense for me was actually watching the first episode of Torchwood down in the Bay with a friend of mine, and then walking home. I had to go back to Canton and walking through the Bay at night after watching the first episode of Torchwood, and I was like, this was on telly. I was like in my mid-20s, but it still felt like a big deal seeing, you know, your hometown represented in a positive, cool, way on screen. So I think that, it's seeing the representation of places you're familiar with. And then also the fun of watching places you're familiar with dressed up as something completely different. That's always, that's, the location teams work and stuff. But seeing these places and going, Castle Coch surrounded by German barking Daleks and stuff. That was.
And as someone who's not, I don't work on the show, for me, just walking through Cardiff and suddenly seeing a TARDIS or a doctor or any of multitude of other things.
Or Roald Dahl Platt's blown apart bits of shrapnel
Yes,
everywhere.
that was particularly
That was
fun that day.
yeah.
It's just really good to see that, and it's good to know that it's an LGBT positive show that is bringing all that to Cardiff.
Which I think is a really good way to bring on next. We've talked about how the show itself has affected Cardiff. As a member of the LGBT community, I don't know if you'd guessed. I'm dressing things up. I think it's brilliant, and that's what I'd like to bring on to the next section, is what's meant for the gay community and the trans community in Cardiff and the surrounding areas, which are the valleys, Bridgend, Swansea, North Wales. Cleo, can I start with you on that?
Yeah, so, I'm currently the series producer on Poblancombe, and we have a gay couple in Poblancombe, and they got married last November. That was the first, we'd done civil partnerships before, but this was the first wedding, and it was actually the first soap in the UK to actually do that. And what was really nice for me was, even though we knew that it was our gay couple getting married, in all the media and all the press, all the coverage of it, it was never mentioned as a gay wedding. It's just our favourite characters are getting married. So it's just seen as a wedding rather than gay couple get married. And I think if you look back, when Poblancombe did a lesbian kiss back in '97, the people tried to ban it because it was going out before the watershed. We had to time that it wasn't actually longer than 2 seconds. Because it could literally just be a peck on the lips, and that was it. So when you just imagine how things have changed in such a positive way, and that a lot of that comes out of shows like Doctor Who, which family entertainment, which put it out there, and then it just gets accepted, and it's just changed everything for the rest of television and drama. I think it's had a massive effect.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you there. Edward, you said you moved to Cardiff for the show, and you met and fell in love with the guy here. So it's obviously had a very...
How do you know it's him I'm talking about? It could be someone else. Yeah, it is. Don't worry. It's you.
Darling.
Glad I'm not going back to your house tonight. It could have been really awkward. So it's obviously had a very, very positive impact on your life.
Yeah.
How else do you think that might have helped?
Oh, I don't know. Whenever I tell people what I do for a living, people are always interested. We had to pop to the opticians this morning, and it's my third or fourth appointment, and I deliberately haven't told him what I do for a living, because if you met him, you'd guess that he was a Doctor Who fan. It's all I'm going to say, and I'll leave you to all work out what that could possibly mean, but I think you could probably do understand. And it came up today that what I was doing, why I was here, and what I did, and it was great because he was so excited and so interested to know about Doctor Who and what I did and what was happening today, and that's fantastic that you can do something, you can be part of something, part of a community that just embraces and loves everything about it. And Cardiff almost has turned a blind eye to the fact that it's happened. It's so accepting of it. People don't get annoyed that there's filming of Doctor Who on Queen Street, because it's something to be proud of. And it's also really normal to walk down there now and see the TARDIS there. And you've got to remember that Cardiff has become home to Christopher Eccleston, David Tennant, Billy Piper, all these people, Elizabeth Sladen, have actually lived here for almost a year on end and come back year after year. And they've always been very, very positive about Cardiff. They've always been very, very excited about it. And something to be really proud of. Somebody's phoning me now. Is it you, Russell? You can't help but be proud of Doctor Who, proud of Cardiff, proud of the LGBT community here, which has embraced Doctor Who possibly more than any other community here, I think. Am I allowed to say that? You're all going to agree with me there. Yes. It's just wonderful to wake up every day and be part of it. To be me.
It's lovely to be you.
Yeah.
David?
I don't know. I think... Yeah, sorry, my mind's just gone completely blank.
Okay, I'll give you a couple of minutes.
Have a jelly baby, they often help.
Yeah.
I've been involved with Pride Cymru, or in its previous incarnation, Cardiff Mardi Gras, for some time, and Russell was a patron for us for quite a while, and I remember a particularly beautifully sunny day when the rain just decided it wanted to join us, and we had on stage, at one stage, John Barrowman, Russell T Davies, and a gay Dalek. And I'm quite surprised that Gareth isn't here actually, who gave us the Dalek for the day. And Charlotte Church. Yeah, that's one of the weirdest and most fabulous nights of my life. And that and the Sheila's Wheels girls, I think. Is that right? Yes. And everybody wanted a photograph with the Sheila's Wheels girls and the Dalek. We had a couple of guys from Steps, didn't care. And I think that's a wonderful thing. For me, science fiction, and in particular the Whoniverse, has always been really good for LGBT characters because in my head it's a place where the Doctor and his companions strive for peace and love and unity. And whether that's a universe created in the heterotonation, or Gene Roddenberry with Star Trek, or, sorry, I've got to mention Buffy, otherwise Russell will kill me. I think that's really important because it means that those of us who are part of the LGBT community have somewhere we can escape to when things have not been so good. And I think I can probably speak on behalf of every single one of us here. We've all had our times where it's been a bit rough, and we've given that door, open door, I've got to be careful what I say now because I'm wearing a dress that looks like a TARDIS, an open door into a world where we can run away and hide and sometimes regroup. And for me, that's really important. The fact that happens in my home city is amazing.
Yeah, I think the Doctor just accepts LGBT people.
Well,
And
I was going to say, I think that was just such a logical step. When you had Captain Jack appear, it didn't feel like a character who'd been shoehorned into this almost 50-year-old or 40-odd-year-old series. It just felt like a logical next step. That's exactly the kind of person he would meet along the way. And different incarnations of the Doctor might have handled Captain Jack differently. William Hartnell might have got in a bit of a fluster. But, you know...
I think
but it just seemed like a logical...
Patrick Troughton would handle it.
But I think it just seemed very organic for that to happen.
For me, one of the big differences that I notice, and I think Who and the whole Who universe has been a big part of making the change, is when I was living in London, I actually had a number of friends who were primarily gay men from Wales, many of them from the valleys, who basically had run away in the 70s and the 80s and gone to London. And I know there were others who went to Manchester and other places. You know, people didn't feel comfortable at that point being LGBT here. And they went to places like that. And indeed, for a long time, I worked for the Terence Higgins Trust, which is named after a Welsh man, young Welsh gay man who moved to London. And yet now, when I'm here, this is a very gay-friendly place. There are more trans people in Wales, I swear, than anywhere else I've ever lived. It's much more welcoming atmosphere than even London. It's a huge difference. So I can imagine that a young gay man now might move to London for fame and fortune, but I think they'd be a lot less likely to move to London because of homophobia. They might come down to Cardiff from somewhere that might be more isolated. But actually, you know, this is now a friendly town. We had an exhibition this week from Pride that was launched in a Senedd where we had 3 out gay AMs, gay and lesbian, and so much else that's going on. It's not hard to find LGBT people in positions of authority and influence who are quite happy to be out, quite happy to be role models. And that's a huge difference from, 20, 30 years ago, I think.
I think you've got to remember that Doctor Who is full of LGBT characters, and not just the odd one here and there. Doctor Who is the biggest show in the country, other than continuing dramas. It's the biggest show, that the UK's got. And we've had Captain Jack for a start, but also we've had Clara has insinuated that she's had lesbian romances. We've had River Song doing the same. We've had countless characters in Torchwood, obviously, including Yanto. In Sarah Jane Adventures, we had Luke. Was it actually ever on screen, or was that just a potential there? But that would have happened if it had continued. I've got a theory that Sarah Jane was a bit of a lesbian as well. Now, let me explain this.
Was it the dungarees?
That's a good point. In the Tortured episode, Greeks Bearing Gifts, we've got the alien who becomes a character called Mary that has a sort of lesbian relationship with Toshiko, and then you do see her turn into sort of an alien Firefly character at the end. So I've always thought that's an alien lesbian. In the very first episode of Sarah Jane that we did, probably because it was the only out-of-the-box CGI that we had Sarah Jane kissing goodbye to that at the very beginning of it. So I reckon they'd had a little lesbian affair. What do you reckon? It's a possibility. So that, you know...
So there is logic there, you've applied...
I've given it a lot of thought in the last 10 minutes when I thought I need to say something relevant, yes, yeah. But, you know, we've got that in a mainstream TV show. As I say, the biggest TV show in the UK's got has got all those very positive characters, and that's wonderful. If you're a young person, when I grew up in the 70s and 80s, the only gay people that I saw out there were Mr. Humphreys and, you know, Larry Grayson and that kind of stuff. And, you know, I thought, I'm not like that, I don't want to be like that, and I had no role models at all. And now people today have those wonderful role models. I love Mr. Humphreys, I absolutely love him, fantastic. But, you know, isn't it brilliant that people in this room and elsewhere have got wonderful, positive, accepted role models?
I think another thing, you know, when we were talking about the positive impact that Doctor Who has had, you know, if you look back, if you think of the film Pride, I know that film was around for a long time, trying to be commissioned and find funding for, but it couldn't. But I think because of shows like Doctor Who, with the LGBT and the fact that it was in Wales, it made it acceptable, made it possible, and that's why we had the fantastic film that we had in Pride last year.
Mm-hmm. We've not mentioned the industry, and this is something that is important to clear as well. The TV industry, the drama industry, is now established in Wales, in the Cardiff area. We've had so many shows made here. Obviously, Doctor Who, Torturous, Sarah Jane Adventures, Class, Wizards vs. Aliens. But all the other stuff that's come here since, such as Upstairs, Downstairs, Casualty, Merlin, Sherlock, you know, I can't think of them all now, but there's so many dramas that are made here. It's become the centre of excellence for drama. And that is all because Doctor Who was commissioned to be made here. And the reason that now Cardiff is the biggest drama industry area in the whole of the UK is because of Russell T Davies, and he brought that industry here, which is fantastic. And Rothlock Studios in the Bay was built because of that, Russell. Thank you for giving us that. And when we were building, we did say to Russell, do you want a studio or a garden or something like that named after you? And he's like, no, just call Little Alley after me or something. So we've got Russell's Passage now. Many have got lost in Russell's Passage over the years.
I love your analogy that it's just quite true that Cardiff has become the home of British TV drama, so I think it's quite relevant that we can call it the Drama Queen.
Absolutely.
I think at this point it would be a good time to open the floor. Does anybody have any questions for our panellists? Hello, down in the middle. We're going to get people with microphones towards you, so bear with us. Run, Gavin.
Poor Gavin.
You can.
I don't think you need one. It's Boomtown, boom.
Little technical assistance this morning, miss, thank you. Hello, good morning, or afternoon, whatever it is. Hello. As LGBT people, and I think a lot of us grew up in the 80s and 70s, do you feel there was any, for yourselves or generally, any similarity between coming out, especially back then, and coming out as a Doctor Who fan?
It's interesting. Go on, sorry.
No, I would say many similarities for me, because the show was cancelled in '89 when I would have turned 11. So for much of my teenage years, it wasn't on the air, and I never spoke about it and couldn't discuss it with anyone. And then, of course, it kind of. But no, I think there is kind of. Well, certainly at that time there would have been. I think now, good grief, everyone's a Doctor Who fan. Well, not everyone, but like all my nieces and nephews are and stuff. So. Yeah, but certainly
it's interesting because I suppose I came out when I was 18, which would have been 1988. I know I don't look that old. But that probably was the era, dare I say it, and I will never repeat this, when I was least in love with Doctor Who was about 1987, 88, and it was the moment, partly because I was 17, 18 years old and suddenly discovering lots of other things, but also I feel the series was not at its strongest, and I was slightly embarrassed about it. I'm not now, and I love that era. I really rediscovered stories like Remembrance of the Daleks, and they're brilliant. But it's kind of like being gay took over from being a Doctor Who fan because I suddenly had something else to be interested in. Now I do both, which is great. But yeah, there is a correlation there, definitely.
I come from North Wales. You didn't talk about being gay or Doctor Who.
I think my family just assumed.
From that outfit, yes.
It was the TARDIS rocket.
It was the TARDIS rocket. I've been wearing this since I was 14.
Size 14.
That's it, I'm not lending it to you now. Thank you. Does that answer you, Elisa?
Well, I don't know if anybody else remembers, but back in the 80s there was actually a gay Doctor Who fan group called the Sisterhood of Khan. Still going. Brilliant. But my favourite gay nerds were all part of that group, and I never was. I don't know whether it was mainly a gay men's group or what, but I used to chat to people about it, and they were very kind of, it was quite hard to come out as a Who fan in the gay world, and quite hard to come out as gay in the Who world. Certainly if you weren't part of the in crowd, it was. And so, there is an interesting analogy there. But I disappeared from the fandom for a long time. I watched right from the first episode. Yes, we're all going on about age. I watched the first episode and I'm proud of it. and Patrick Troughton was my doctor. And it was the weirdness of Patrick Troughton that helped me not be a conforming sort of girly. In many ways, not just being a lesbian, that was just part of it. But it was a really big deal for me to see that, to have someone who was that different, who was just that awkward on the screen. And then I confess I didn't watch Who for quite a long time. And then I fell madly back in love with the new Who when it started, because I just thought it was so brilliant right from the start. And then Captain Jack turned up and all these things started happening, and suddenly it was utterly cool to be both LGBT and a Who fan. It was brilliant.
Amazing. Happy with that? What about yourself?
I think, especially in the 80s at school, it was, I could hide being gay.
Really?
In my mind. But it was sort of an outlet to hang around with those sort of out of the central what's it of people, to be with the geeky Doctor Who fan people and become a part of that group, because I didn't fit with the others, as it were. So I was very in the closet, but out about being a Doctor Who fan. And in the 80s, all you got was abuse, mostly. So you just came out and swapped one for the other.
Do you think being a Doctor Who fan sort of prepared you for being a gay man? Because you'd already been used to being ostracised in some way and considered a minority.
And I'm curious, did you have a fabulous scarf to wear?
I did. And I wore it to school. It was really quite tragic. And I didn't care. And I didn't care about that, because I was so used to being outside of society in that respect, that then when I discovered, I came out and going, actually I like boys, and all that went away. I put that aside and just chased after boys instead. Right.
Nice.
They just ran faster.
Do we have any other questions for this panel? Over here. Thank you, Tracy. Gavin panicked then, he thought he had to cross the room.
There are so many questions that I could ask about queerness and Doctor Who, but I'm trying to focus on the Cardiff Wales point of view. So I was just wondering, what's the relationship between Cardiff-based Whoniverse and this, let's say, tradition of science fiction that Wales seems to have? There's this very famous book about a week in the future of Wales, about Welsh nationalism, and there's all these crazy ideas about future Wales, maybe about some sort of very active political imagination. But I just wondered if there's a certain legacy that you guys see from this tradition of Welsh sci-fi.
I think it's because Wales is God's own country, but we'll speak to that later. Let's not forget, at the end of World War Z, it was Wales that found the cure. So,
Yes. And it was Peter Capaldi in the World Health Organization.
yes, it was.
Ooh, weird.
I don't know the book you're referring to. I don't know if any of my...
I'm not familiar with, but I would say, I don't know, there is something, when you grow up here, it's an odd landscape to grow up in, and I think it is kind of fertile for science fiction. I mean, when I grew up in surrounded up in the valleys, and you've got kind of ruins there that aren't that old. You know, they're only 150 to 100 years old, but it just feels like this kind of slightly post-apocalyptic-y place that's tucked away up on the hillside, old mines that have been demolished or half demolished or whatever. So I think it's a fertile place for that kind of imagination. Definitely.
I think I've run across less sci-fi other stuff in Wales, but I've run across a lot of mystery stories and spooky stories and myth stories and myths bleeding into the real world type stuff that particularly fits Wales because of the levels of isolation, the differences in the landscape.
Castles, we've got lots and lots of castles.
And for me, the episode of anything in the whole Who universe that captured that was the one about cannibals in Torchwood. What was it called?
Countryside.
Countryside. Countryside is absolutely that mix of those two things, the spookiness of parts of the Welsh countryside mixed in with the science fiction of Torchwood. There's a perfect Welsh expression.
There's that brilliant scene in The Unquiet Dead as well, where the Gelth are invading and you've got the Doctor and Rose in Sneed's basement and they're going about, it's the end of the world and we're here and we're going to die in Cardiff. Brilliant.
I think there is, as my colleague said, there is a magic and mysticism around Wales, going back to the stories of Merlin and Prince Arthur, and not to forget that there is actually a rift in space and time running through the centre of Roald Dahl. So I think that might be good. Anything else, guys? I think we have time for one more question before we move on to the next section. Oh, now everybody wants to talk. Should we go to... Right at the back, I think, because I like your hair. There will be opportunities for question and answers after every panel during the day, by the way, guys. So if we miss you this time, park it, we'll have you later.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, so I was basically wondering if there were any different, specific characters or storylines that relate to you, coming out or before you came out as being LGBT.
That's a good one. I'm going to think about that a second because I've done lots of talking. So I'm going to go to Llyr.
Can I think as well?
Yeah.
It's early morning.
I'll drop in. As I said before, for me it was Patrick Troughton. It was the fact that he was prepared to be the awkward squad, that he was prepared to question, much more so than I thought the companions were terribly girly, I have to say, in those days. But I could identify very much with that. And in the new Who, I've got to say, I adore Missy. And I adore River Song. I think River Song is a great, stroppy woman, but this is not about me coming out. This is about... River Song is much more about me going, yes, you can be that bloody rude and sassy as an older woman. And it's great. I mean, I just think the whole Alex Kingston thing has done wonders for older women in science fiction, which is another thing that is not allowed, is at least as taboo as being gay. So I just think everybody's got a role model somewhere in the Who universe.
Do you think would you consider Missy to be transgender, in effect? It's someone who was a man and is now a woman.
I think that's, you could make a very good case for the Master and Missy as being a transgender trope within there, but I will also leave that for the people on our panel who know, or later panels who know more about that. I think that one might come up in the Monsters panel, quite possibly, because if you want an anti-hero, it's definitely Missy. The Master was more of just plain mean, but Missy has her fans in a big way.
I kind of associated slightly with the Doctor when I was younger because he wasn't interested in anything sexual or romantically with anyone else in that period, and I knew that it wasn't right, I believe, to like boys. I didn't necessarily like girls, so I could be like the Doctor instead of not really care about either of them, and so he kind of was a role model in a way, not one that, you know, once I did decide I like boys, then I haven't stopped, but, you know, it sort of helped me find someone out there that wasn't all about wanting to have relationships.
Chaps?
I can't think of anything really. I think because it was off the air at the time when I was starting to sort of realise who I was and realise what my identity was, it wasn't necessarily a touchstone for me at that point. And then by the time it came back, I was in my mid-20s. So I think, I'd never really... But thinking back on it, the one thing that was consistent was the TV shows that I would watch with my mum went from 1989 to 1999, went Doctor Who, Tales of the City, Queer as Folk. So there's probably something in there, but I'd have to have a proper think of it. But
we're all of we're all of the wrong generation. It'd be nice to speak to people who are here in their teens and 20s to find out if Captain, and I know there are people that are on panels later that might be talking about this, whether Captain Jack or River Song or Clara helped you, you know, was a role model for you, and I can't wait to hear stuff like that.
Absolutely.
So I just remember growing up and looking through the TV Times to find the programme that had the pink triangle next to them.
Yeah.
So, and knowing that you would get something you could identify in that, and then going upstairs and watching it on my own, and just making sure the pink triangle was there and I was on the right programme.
I was poor, I had a black and white TV, I had to imagine it was pink. Again, I think I am possibly of the wrong generation. I think it's a brilliant question you've asked. I grew up watching things like Space 1999 and Doctor Who. And it was just never mentioned. I think there was a touch of it in Star Trek Next Generation in the late...
But there was an awful lot of Lycra.
Lots of Lycra. But what I will say is I'm going to... a world I feel is parallel to the Whoniverse is Wizards vs. Aliens, and which I thoroughly enjoyed, incidentally. And I remember there was a scene where... the best friend came out and his mate went, okay. And for me, that was brilliant, because that's what coming out should be. It should be like, really? I don't need to know, carry on. And it's amazing that shows that have generated within the science fiction community have helped pave the way for young people going forward, I think, just by being accepting. Which I think is probably a good way to round things up. So ladies and gentlemen, my thanks to my colleagues on the panel.